I'm Natasha Delisle-Barrow. I'm currently head of people at Goosechase. Goosechase is an interactive experience platform. Essentially what we do is we create experiences for sort of a range of situations and customers and scenarios. So it's originally born out of the sort of scavenger hunt. And what we do is we would probably work with, say, like HR people to create great onboarding experiences. You can use this for great team building, social experiences, also to sort of enhance and really sort of take your learning and development to a new level as well. We're quite an unusual company. I always say that because we've taken this idea of flexibility and we've really kind of pushed it to its furthest limit. What I mean by that is that we're a 4-day week, we're completely asynchronous, we are remotely distributed as well. So anything to do with flexibility is sort of like we tick all the boxes.
That's such an amazing intro. And some of the community will know you already because you spoke about your work in the 4-day week at our conference. And so hopefully people will not only learn from your genius around your approach, in this case, looking at UX approach to people experience, but also now people know about Goosechase, so they can check them out as well.
Great.
So, I saw your post and I thought it was super interesting. So thrilled that you're sharing it with more of the community. So can you share a bit about where it started? So when you talk about taking a UX approach to the employee experience or people experience, what does that mean and why did you start doing that?
Okay, so I basically think that this is something that probably been doing for quite a number of years, in all honesty, without actually realizing that this is kind of the UX approach, without sort of putting that label on it. People and HR people have moved more towards sort of being data driven, for example, looking at the sort of user, or you're looking at that sort of what we always typically call employee experience. We've created personas with regards to employer branding, for example. So you can sort of see that we've used various concepts for various situations and various challenges that we face with all those employee touch points. But we've never really approached it from sort of like a strategical perspective, like an overarching people strategy. And I always thought that was really interesting. And the background that I have working with sort of startup companies that are agile, that move quite quickly, is that you need a way of working which is iterative, and can flex and evolve as the business does, but also at the same time puts very much the person, the user, or the employee at the heart of everything you do. So it's about taking all those design thinking approaches and not just using them for specific solutions, but using them actually as a overarching, higher, holistic approach to people.
Yeah, I love that you have, or you're making the opportunity to do that. So rather than just looking there and there, to be able to have this canvas that I'll share and really map it out. I'm going to put a link to your article, which is great. And for the purposes today, I'd love to get your thoughts on some of the areas that I thought were highlights I'm particularly interested in. So the first is you talked about that people functions or HR functions need to balance standardizing and efficiency with individualization and personalizing. I'm not sure which terms you use, but that balance. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how that influences the approach you're taking?
Yeah, I mean, typically what you see with a lot of HR approaches in particular, or people approaches in particular, is that there's always this need to want to streamline in order to be effective. And that causes us to almost have a bit of a conflict, a bit of a tension within the business as a whole as well. Because the minute you start to streamline, the minute you start to look at those processes and things like that, you remove the user, you remove the employee out of the equation. You're not looking at what is actually for them. And this is about really keeping people at the focus and at the heart of the work that we do. Data, for example, that we use is not new to us. You know, more and more of us are becoming more data literate and using data to inform our decisions, and then still going into something which is operationally efficient and operationally compliant, but not necessarily humanistic or people focused. And so I really wanted to create something, and my approach was to really look at something that could do that. It also means then that you start speaking a language that CEOs, product managers, and teams around you can use. So HR and people doesn't just become this sort of side guy or side chick, but actually is sort of part of the main conversation. And it brings people and culture really at the heart of strategy, which is really where we want to be.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That mindset. I remember reading something about how some policy in another company, how many policies were because there might have been a conduct issue by one person, and then that resulted in a policy that affected the whole company. So I really appreciate let's not just do what's simplest or standard for everyone. Another highlight for me from your work is one of the practical things you mentioned is how you define desired states. Could you tell us about, if somebody's trying to do this, taking this UX approach to people experience, what do you see desired states as, and why did you have them?
Yeah, it's interesting because Andrew Cross, Andrew is the CEO and founder of Goosechase. He and I sit down a lot and we discuss this. What can tend to happen is that the reason why I always say don't focus so much on the solution is because what tends to happen is that we do then go into this situation of, okay, this is the problem, so this is the solution that we have to take. And again, what that stops you from doing is looking at different approaches. It stops you from looking to the user again in terms of solutionizing. And it tends to very much be that kind of one size fits all approach. What I wanted to do is go a little bit higher level than that, I suppose, really. And the desired states is a way of really explaining or stating, well, this is what we want to do well. This is where we want to be. But we haven't necessarily got to the granular detail of what that is. So, for example, one of the things that I think I probably said, for example, might be, I don't know, let's say we want to be have a strong employer brand or something like that, which attracts, I don't know, engineers or hard to fill roles. That could be like an out there example, let's just say. But what I haven't said is the how I'm going to do that. And that's where the solutioning comes in. And the reason why I haven't done that is because wanting to be agile as the landscape shifts and changes, that desired state will kind of always remain constant, but the means of getting there can then flex and can change. And I think that's probably the best way for me to explain the desired states versus the solution. I'm trying to think if there's a better way to describe it.
I get it. And for me, it's another thing I really like about it is that flexibility is a really key principle to your company. And this is another example of that. So you might do that through when you work, you might do it about where you work. And then here you've got it in terms of how you work, rather than being very specific at an early stage, these desired states enable that flexibility. So I really like how you're kind of living that principle, similar to how you've got people over profit or people before profit. You've got this theme of flexibility is influencing everything you do.
Yeah. And I think one of the things as well, when I was originally approaching a task, I mean, what you see there, for example, in the blog is a really kind of almost finalized version of the work that I did. And to be honest with you, if you were to look at that Miro board today that I created, it's a mess of sort of taking a step back forward and another one back, or going, actually, you know what, this is thinking too narrowly, we need to widen this up and we need to broaden the scope. And there was a lot of having to do that, where you're going in and all of a sudden you've got something granular and you're thinking, actually, that might not be the situation today. This is short term. What I want to do is go back a step. So you're constantly doing that with these things. And so it was it was, as I said in the blog, it's one of those things where you take 2 steps forward and maybe 1 back.
So there's one final thing before our last question. So the final thing that I wanted to really draw out of the article you shared is there's what seems to be like a user story, like I'll put it up on the screen, but a visual. Can you explain like what is a user story, or what is this, and what can we learn from it?
Yeah. So the user story was the way of taking the employee journey. And what I did was I looked at it at various touch points. So as you can see in that board, I pulled out the 4 key touch points that were important to us. However, they may be touch points which other companies will use that are more important to their sort of strategy and direction. So you know, you should really apply that as you will. And what I had done was, through using all the research and the insights and the information I gathered, I developed my personas, I developed the employee journey, and I'd understood what it was that we would need to do well at each step of the journey, what our employees needed to do in order to exceed their objectives. So the overarching ambition is for team members to be able to exceed their objectives at Goosechase. That's the sort of TLDR. And essentially what I wanted to do was figure out a way of taking that user story, that user journey, and mapping it with strategy. So I didn't want it to be, oh, well, we've got to do this because that's what people want. And and companies say that that's what retention is. Didn't want to do that. I wanted to say that if we want to really hire and attract the best people to Goosechase, we need to be able to do this really well, which means our employees need us to do this really, really well. And so it was, and that for me was like creating this mental model that just brought it all together. And that was kind of something that I guess, that was how my brain worked. That was how I went about it. Again, it's not me saying that's the way you have to do it, but I like things that I can break down into a really simplistic, logical ways. So yeah, it was kind of like, okay, so in order to set people up for success, which is obviously onboarding, we need to be able to do these things really, really well, which means our employees or our team members need us to do this incredibly well. And so it was kind of tying all that together and bridging that gap. And really, again, aligning the user journey with the strategy.
You just ended on what I was going to say, which is, once again, you've really shown how much of a consistent thread making sure what you're doing is aligned to and delivering the business strategy through your people strategy. Like, it's so powerful, like it really comes across. I'm going to finish on one more question, the last question, which is, if somebody wants to look at, experiment, try, get inspired by the work you've done so far, I'll put a link to the article, but what advice would you offer someone?
Well, first of all, I will be cleaning up the Miro board and creating a template, and I'll open source that on Miro for everybody to use. So,
that's cool.
So then they can just use it as they will. But I guess the advice that I would give with this is to do with this desired states, if I'm honest with you. I think that was, for me, was the most powerful part of all of this, was not jumping to solutions. It wasn't jumping to answers. It was really, really understanding what we needed to do well at each of the stages of our journey as a company. So the initial table, which you will see on the Miro board, for example, states, okay, when we're, say, 50 people, we have to, these will be the challenges that we face. You know, when we're 70 people, when we're 100 people. And I've kind of also put those journeys in, the company journey in there, and the challenges that we're bound to face along the way. And so I would say focus on the desired states. Don't focus on the solution.
Brilliant. That is such a great practical piece of advice. So thank you so much for being part of this. If people would like to follow along, hear about when you post the Miro board, how do people do that?
Oh, you can find me all over LinkedIn, to be honest with you. It's probably the best thing.
Perfect.
I'm also present in a lot of people communities, and
Yeah.
I speak a lot about organizational design, which I guess is why the strategy comes up. So, yeah, give me a follow, reach out. I tend to do sort of like sort of bi-weekly or monthly get-togethers and little roundtables about certain issues which people can join and exchange ideas. So, yeah.
You're a very generous contributor to the community. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.